Chris, thanks so much for your time. Now, a lot of reporting has been done about how sports players don't necessarily have a career after the game, but you are very different. And my question to you is it common for sports players nowadays to be thinking about life after the game?
Firstly, afternoon. Thanks very much for having me, Fifi. So it isn't that common. I think the trend is that people are moving, rugby professional players are starting to realize that life after rugby can be quite daunting. So there is definitely a trend to start approaching that differently. But to answer your question, the number is still very low for guys that are doing actively something during their professional rugby career.
All right, but then you went and you juggled two very demanding careers. I mean, I have people that I know who are trying to be CAs and they're finding it tough. You did it while also becoming captains of very prominent rugby teams. How did you do that?
So I think I was quite lucky. I developed lately as a rugby player. So my foundation was, from a study side, was got off to a good start. I was fortunate enough to complete my studies before I was involved in a professional rugby union. And only once I had started my articles with Deloitte did I get the opportunity to play fully professional rugby. And I suppose, fortunately, I was able to do the both due to Deloitte's ability to, help me out and ensure that I could be able to do both.
Is it quite common practice, would you say, for the corporate sector to be supportive in one's sporting ambitions?
To be honest, I think I was quite lucky. I think, Deloitte were very key in playing a support role. They also had the responsibility of ensuring that I was a successful and a good an accountant and a trainee. So, there was obviously a certain amount of sacrifice that came from my side and from their side. But I think, due to Deloitte's ability to support me throughout the whole process, we were able to make it work.
And I see that during that process, when you were at Deloitte, you did take a bit of a break to focus on the rugby.
So there was a short period where I was under a bit of pressure and I decided to take a break, but it didn't take me long to realize that this is definitely what I didn't want. And I, in fact, got in contact with Deloitte again and said I would please like to, come back and please finish as soon as possible, because I'd realized that I was falling behind. Trainees that I'd started with were starting to finish, and that had, driven me to rather pursue both at the same time and ensure that I could become a CA as quickly as possible.
I mean, was there ever a time where you wanted to give up on both? And if so, how did you get yourself back up again?
Fifi, there wasn't really a single occasion that I can think about where I wanted to give up both. There were definitely some testing times where I had some very late nights and some very early mornings. But I think, the great thing about the degree and the way in which the article program is structured, the end was always in sight, and I knew that some sacrifice now would be so worth it, and that's what pushed me to complete my articles and to carry on pursuing both my passion on the rugby field as well as keep focused and complete my article program.
And Chris, you did say at the top of the interview that it's not very common for many sports players, not only in rugby, to be thinking about what they're going to do when their life expires there in the game. But I mean, whose fault is that in addressing that? I mean, whose responsibility should it be? Should it be the players to be thinking about what am I going to do next, or even the sporting fraternity?
I think, that's a great question. I think it's actually twofold. I think, the individual person has a responsibility to ensure that he takes certain steps to want to make sure that things are okay after rugby. But I definitely believe that all sporting fraternities could do a bit more to ensure that a tertiary education becomes, paramount, and to ensure that they are made very aware of the reality of a post sportsman's life, after the sport. And I think just as much as the fraternities can make options available and educate the individuals, I think the individual also has a responsibility to want to take those active steps to become someone that's got something behind their name.
And you highlight mentorship as being something that was key with your development. I mean, how important is being mentored to one attaining success?
I think, that's exactly it. Deloitte runs a very successful mentorship program. I was very fortunate to have both in Johannesburg and Cape Town, great mentors that always looked out for my best needs and understood, the fact that I had maybe a passion outside of auditing. And with that, they supported me. They were very key in ensuring that I could keep both my rugby union happy as well as Deloitte itself.
And now that you are essentially a boss of your own accounting company, what are you doing to allow other employees to pursue similar interests?
So I think, it's always important in any corporate space or any business to ensure that, your employees are happy and that there's a balance between hard work, but also to ensure that the employees get to do the things that, keep them happy. And I think I learned a lot from Deloitte in that respect. I can remember in my first year as an audit trainee, they were in fact driving a campaign where they were encouraging people to share their stories of what they do outside of the firm. And I think that's so important in keeping, the environment happy and stimulating, to ensure that the guys want to give their best when they're involved on a day-to-day basis.
Your industry, Chris, has been in the headlines quite somewhat because of one of the major players there, KPMG, and the allegations around that. I mean, how has that helped or maybe made it more difficult for you as a business person?
I think, fortunately, we at Walworth don't really specialize in any of the auditing. We specifically, want to avoid the risk involved there. And we like to look after the bookkeeping, accounting, and tax and compliance of these companies. But I think, in that situation, it's so important to remember that as CASAs, we have been trained to at all times perform with ethics. And I think, the fraternity as a whole might have taken a knock, but I'm convinced that, with the new trainees coming through, that we'll be fine and we'll be looked after.
And you must have heard about the downgrade. What does this do to your company?
Well, I think in general, it creates challenges for the whole climate and the environment. But, we specifically are looking at SMEs, and we're trying to facilitate where we can in the entrepreneurial space, which I still think is very exciting and very well geared with legislation in South Africa. So I'm still very optimistic about our opportunity and how Walworth as a company can assist these entrepreneurs and SMEs to be better companies.
And Chris, we've actually just been discussing business confidence a little earlier on in the show, and something that was highlighted was political stability as being a key factor in increasing business confidence. You say you're optimistic, but for you, what could make you more optimistic about the prospects of the South African economy?
I think you've almost answered it with the question, and that is that stability that we're all looking for as South Africans. We I think we all, in general, you know, are optimistic about South Africa, and we want to so badly be optimistic. But I think exactly what we need is that what you've mentioned, and that stability going forward, and to ensure that, you know, we as South Africans can put confidence in the way the political setup will look going forward. So definitely that stability is what we want.
Well, Chris, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks so much for your time. That was Western Province Captain Chris van Zyl, of course.